Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
We returned the name, restored the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War.
Bragg is back. Fort Benning is back. Iran's nuclear program is obliterated.
American strength is back on the world stage. We're going to rebuild our defense industrial base into a new arsenal of freedom.
We will have the best ships, the best subs, the best planes, the best fighters, the best drones, missiles, air defense, space defense, Golden Dome, you name it. America will be stronger than ever before.
This is a core mission of defending the nation, getting down to that border and getting control of it. We're not just undoing damage, we're solidifying the way forward. Getting our allies and partners to step up and share the burden.
We're restoring the warrior ethos. No more political correctness, gender pronouns, DEI, CRT, or climate change.
We have the strongest, most powerful, most lethal, and most prepared military on the planet. We are the strength part of peace through strength. America first.
That was the Department of War's look back at 2025. Also, as a side note, I realize that the Department of War is technically still the Department of Defense, no matter what Trump and Hegseth call it, until Congress officially changes it. I don't call it the Department of War to recognize their label as legitimate. I call it that as a mockery of their violent masculinity because I think it's ridiculous. But that said, they are quite proud of the things they did in 2025. But what their year in review didn't include was that during the final month of 2025, they were planning to kidnap Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife as they slept in their bed. And if you think the term kidnapping is harsh, Trump says it's not a bad term. Here he is speaking with reporters about his interactions with the acting president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez.
It depends on what happens. It depends a little bit on the new administration, if you want to call it.
So if you see that pushback from Rodriguez and ultimately...
Well, I don't think there was pushback. I think that...
She called it...
you hear a different person than I hear.
Really? So you have spoken with her?
We talked to them, yeah.
Oh, you did speak with her?
They've been very good.
Because she called it kidnapping of Maduro.
It's all right. It's not a bad term.
Speaking of Rodriguez, who was sworn in as Venezuela's president after we kidnapped Maduro, Trump apparently views her as his pawn.
We're dealing with the people. We're dealing with the people that just got sworn in. And don't ask me who's in charge because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
And what if she doesn't submit to whatever Trump tells her to do?
We were prepared to do a second strike if we needed. We're totally prepared.
But that's off the table.
We're still prepared.
That's off the table now.
No, it's not. If they don't behave, we will do a second strike.
So what is all this about? Because the Trump administration is going to point to the indictments as their legal justification for using the Department of War as their police to arrest Maduro, and the liberal initial knee-jerk conspiracy response to Trump's kidnapping of Maduro and takeover of Venezuela would be to say that it was really about the oil rather than about the indictment. Then the GOP could say, no, this was about Maduro's legal issues, you're just making that up. And we'd go back and forth in speculation and denial. But then, Trump goes and admits it right up front in his press conference the morning after the kidnapping.
We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind. We've had decades of that. We're not going to let that happen. We're there now, and what people don't understand, but they understand as I say this, we're there now, but we're going to stay until such time as the proper transition can take place. So we're going to stay until such time as we're going to run it, essentially, until such time as a proper transition can take place. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so.
Additionally, here's Trump along with Senator Lindsey Graham talking about the oil.
You take down the source of the problem. President Trump didn't wake up one day and say, hey, let's take Venezuela. He did what other people talked about, but didn't have the balls or the guts to do it. This is a good thing. This is not interventionism. This is making America safer. We're going to be more prosperous because of the business deals. There are going to be Americans alive today because he shut down a narco-terrorist state called Venezuela. This is a good thing, not a bad thing.
And the oil companies are going to go in and rebuild their system. They're going to spend billions of dollars, and they're going to take the oil out of the ground, and we're taking back what they stole. Remember, they stole our property. It was the greatest theft in the history of America. Nobody has ever stolen our property like they have. They took our oil away from us. They took the infrastructure away. And all that infrastructure is rotted and decayed. And the oil companies are going to go in and rebuild it. We're not going to spend very much money at all, if anything. But the oil companies are going to go, we're going to take our oil back. But we're going to also do things that, when you look at what he did, the drugs are terrible, but also terrible. He sent hundreds of thousands of people into our country that should not be here. And that means from prisons. That means Tren de Aragua, the gang, Tren de Aragua, that comes out of Maduro's country. He was very friendly with that gang. Well, they're having a hard time right now. You know, we had Tren de Aragua all over Washington, D.C., and they got the hell beat out of them.
They're claiming that Venezuela stole our oil, which is odd because the oil is actually in Venezuela. So what's that all about? According to the Washington Post, it all goes back to a story from 1976. The Washington Post says, quote, U.S. companies never owned oil or land in Venezuela, home to the world's largest proven reserves of crude, and officials didn't kick them out of the country. They quote Francisco Rodriguez, who is a Venezuelan economist at the University of Denver, who said, quote, Trump's claim that Venezuela has stolen oil and land from the U.S. is baseless. Basically what happened was that Venezuela wanted to nationalize its oil industry in order to protect their own sovereignty. And so Rodriguez said, quote, nobody was going to resist Venezuela carrying this nationalization to its end. And the U.S. was much more interested in having Venezuela be a provider of oil, relatively cheap oil, than to have a production collapse in Venezuela. He said that the change was, quote, relatively uncontroversial, unquote. And he said that the Trump administration's position, quote, just doesn't have any logic. He said it's kind of an odd argument. You owe me some money, we both went to court. The court said you pay me this, you start paying me, then I, by force, by the imposition of sanctions, make it impossible for you to continue paying me, and then I accuse you of stealing something from me, unquote. So there is no conspiracy here. It's just Trump being totally honest about seeing and taking the oil, and then lying about the oil being ours, and the GOP not caring at all. That's where we're at today. Of course, if today's GOP won't speak up to Trump, maybe Trump could speak up to Trump. Here's Trump in 2016 talking about the United States' history of attempting to build other nations.
Our current strategy of nation building and regime change is a proven absolute failure.
We will break the cycle of regime change.
We must abandon the failed policy of nation building and regime change that Hillary Clinton pushed in Iraq, in Libya, in Egypt, and in Syria. Regime change takes chaos.
You've seen how that works over the last 20 years. That hasn't been too good. Not a reckless interventionist globalism.
We're getting out of the nation-building business.
And if you think today's situation is totally different than what we've done in the past, The Daily Show put together a side-by-side comparison to the Bush administration's justification for what they did to Iraq and the Trump administration's justification for what they're doing to Venezuela.
I'm not even going to playing around anymore. F it. Hit me with the works. Iraq, Venezuela, go! We're giving them full opportunity to do it the easy way. And when it doesn't work, we'll do it the hard way.
If we can do things the easy way, that's fine. And if we have to do it the hard way, that's fine too.
Chemical weapons is a threat to the United States.
Fentanyl poses a chemical weapons threat to the United States.
Al-Qaeda terrorists inside Iraq.
Al-Qaeda of our hemisphere.
We can get rid of Saddam. It could really begin to transform the region.
There's an opportunity to transform the entire region.
Bringing freedom and democracy.
Democracy and freedom
can serve as a beacon of hope.
Shock and awe.
Unfortunately, remembering history doesn't seem to be a priority for this administration since they're constantly demonizing historians and journalists or forcing museums to change. So instead, we'll have to rely on today's politicians to stand up to him. Here's Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thanks very much for joining me. Donald Trump has once again shown his contempt for the Constitution and the rule of law. Let's be clear. The President of the United States does not have the right to unilaterally take this country into war, even against a corrupt and brutal dictator like Maduro. The United States does not have the right, as Trump stated this morning, to run Venezuela. Congress must immediately pass a war powers resolution to end this illegal military operation and reassert its constitutional responsibilities. Trump's attack on Venezuela will not make the United States and the world safer. Quite the contrary. This brazen violation of international law gives a green light to any country on earth that may wish to attack another nation to seize their resources or change their governments. This is the horrific logic of force that Putin used to justify his brutal attack on Ukraine. Trump and his administration have made it clear that they want to revive the Monroe Doctrine, a belief that claims that the United States has the right to dominate the affairs of the hemisphere. They have spoken openly about controlling Venezuela's oil reserves, the largest in the world. Let's make no mistake about it. This is rank imperialism. It recalls the darkest chapters of U.S. interventions in Latin America, which have left a terrible legacy. It will and should be condemned by the democratic world. Trump campaigned for president on an America First platform. He claimed to be the peace candidate. Well, at a time when 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, when our healthcare system is collapsing, when people throughout this country cannot afford housing, and when artificial intelligence threatens millions of jobs, it is time for the president to focus on the crises facing this country and end the military adventurism abroad. Trump is failing in his job to run the United States of America. He should not be trying to run Venezuela. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, most Republicans are unwilling to stand up to Trump, so they're totally fine with what Trump is doing. That is, except for Marjorie Taylor Greene. She posted on social media, quote, "I've served on the Homeland Security Committee for the past 3 years. I'm 100% for strong, safe, secure borders and stopping narco-terrorists and cartels from trafficking deadly drugs and human trafficking into America. Fentanyl is responsible for over 70% of U.S. drug overdose deaths, and fentanyl comes from Mexican cartels made with chemical precursors from China and trafficked across the U.S.-Mexico border. Mexican cartels are primarily and overwhelmingly responsible for killing Americans with deadly drugs. If U.S. military action and regime change in Venezuela was really about saving American lives from deadly drugs, then why hasn't the Trump administration taken action against Mexican cartels? And if prosecuting narco-terrorists is a high priority, then why did President Trump pardon the former Honduran president Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was convicted and sentenced for 45 years for trafficking hundreds of tons of cocaine into America? Ironically, cocaine is the same drug that Venezuela primarily traffics into the U.S. The next obvious observation is that by removing Maduro, this is a clear move for control over Venezuelan oil supplies that will ensure stability for the next regime change war in Iran. And of course, why is it okay for America to militarily invade, bomb, and arrest a foreign leader, but Russia is evil for invading Ukraine, and China is bad for aggression against Taiwan? Is it only okay if we do it? I'm not endorsing Russia or China. Regime change, funding foreign wars, and Americans' tax dollars being consistently funneled to foreign causes, foreigners both home and abroad, and foreign governments, while Americans are consistently facing increasing costs of living, housing, healthcare, and learn about scams and fraud of their tax dollars, is what has most Americans enraged, especially the younger generations. Boomers and half of Gen X will cheer on neocon wars and talking points, but the other half of Gen X and majority on down see through it and hate it. Americans' disgust with our own government's never-ending military aggression and support of foreign wars is justified because we are forced to pay for it, and both parties, Republicans and Democrats, always keep the Washington military machine funded and going. This is what many in MAGA thought they voted to end. Boy, were they wrong. As the baby boomers slip away both in votes and power, the electoral future will be decided for candidates that focus on American economic populism and promising prosperity for Americans only. As of right now, neither party is offering the solution, unquote. So despite their many differences on a lot of topics, Sanders and Green have a number of similarities here. For example, both oppose U.S. military action and regime change in Venezuela. Both argue that removing Maduro is not justified and will worsen global instability. Each of them frame the intervention as imperialistic and driven by oil interests, not by humanitarian concern. Sanders compares U.S. action to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, warning that it legitimizes aggression, and Green similarly asks why U.S. invasions are acceptable while Russia and China are condemned. Both highlight double standards in international law and morality. Both argue that domestic crises, for example, cost of living, healthcare, housing, jobs, should take priority. Each claims that foreign wars drain resources from struggling Americans. They both frame intervention as betraying voters. Sanders attacks executive overreach and the erosion of constitutional norms, and Green attacks the bipartisan Washington military machine. And both argue that ordinary Americans did not vote for more wars. You'll often hear people say that Americans have more in common than they have differences, and these are some specific examples in which that can be true. But they do have some differences, many of which are rooted in their different worldviews, with Sanders coming from a left-wing democratic socialist perspective and Green coming from a right-wing nationalist populism. So they're both coming to a similar conclusion about Venezuela, but are taking very different paths to get there. Both reject war, regime change, and oil-driven intervention, but Sanders argues from a constitutional and moral principle, whereas Green argues from a populist betrayal and economic nationalism. And it's that imperialist seeing and taking of other people's land for one's own profit, while claiming to be doing what's best for the people you're plundering, that is especially of interest to me. Because this mindset goes back much farther than the Trump, Biden, Obama, and Bush administrations. This mindset goes all the way back prior to the founding of the United States through a Christian theology called divine discovery. And again, this is why it's so important for us to listen to historians and to not whitewash our past. As white colonizers pushed west, religion often traveled with them, and it helped to justify what they did. One of the most prominent figures was a man named David Payne, who was a former Union military leader, and who organized what became the strongest of the so-called boomer encampments. Payne openly framed the movement in biblical terms. He regularly quoted the Bible and drew on Christian hymns to rally support for him. His favorite verse that he repeated often was, "And the Lord commanded unto Moses, go forth and possess the promised land." And the song he loved to have his people sing was called On to Beulah Land, and it included the lyrics, "I've reached the land of corn and wine, and all its riches freely mine." Sound familiar? This is exactly what the Trump administration is doing by taking Venezuela and claiming its riches as theirs, where they can bring in U.S. oil companies and sell Venezuelan oil to other countries. According to historian Robert P. Jones, quote, The crimes of white settlers were so monstrous and the evidence so near at hand that we desperately built theologies, philosophies, and entire cultural worlds designed to obscure the facts and to produce, propagate, and protect these mythic origins. This worldview washed over our churches and seeped into our sermons, liturgies, and hymnals, unquote. He explains how this history is deeply tied to what is known as the Doctrine of Discovery, which came from a series of papal decrees from the 1400s. The Doctrine of Discovery gave religious and legal justification for claiming any land that was not ruled by white Christians. The land could be labeled terra nullius, meaning nobody's land, and taken, regardless of the people already living there. European Christians often justified this by pointing to the biblical story of the Israelites conquering the Canaanites after leaving Egypt. And one of the earliest decrees came in 1452 when Pope Nicholas V granted Portugal the right, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, which are Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, unquote. Again, remember what Trump said? We're in charge. They have to do what we tell them to do, and if they don't behave, then we'll attack again. Vine Deloria Jr. is a Standing Rock Sioux activist, scholar, and an attorney, and he wrote a book called Custer Died for Your Sins, an Indian Manifesto. He said, quote, Discovery negated the rights of the Indian tribes to sovereignty and equality among the nations of the world. It took away their title to their land and gave them the right only to sell, and they had to sell it to the European nation that had discovered their land. Consequently, the European nation, whether England, France, Spain, or Holland, that claimed to have discovered a piece of land had the right to that land, regardless of the people living there at the time. This was the doctrine of the Western world, which was applied to the New World and endorsed as the will of God by the Christian churches of Western Europe, unquote. Deloria went on to explain how this thinking carried into U.S. history. He said, quote, After the Revolution, the new United States adopted the doctrine of discovery and continued the process of land acquisition. The official white attitude toward Indian lands was that discovery gave the United States exclusive right to extinguish Indian title of occupancy either by purchase or conquest, unquote. He goes on to trace this doctrine back to a core assumption, which is the superiority of Western Christian civilization. He says, quote, From this premise, it follows that domination and colonial conquest were merely the means of improving, if not the temporal, then the eternal lot of indigenous peoples. So conceived, no atrocities could possibly tilt the scales of justice against these immeasurable goods, unquote. So there are two elements at play here. One is the entitlement to plunder another people's land, and the other is the claim that by plundering their land, we're actually making their lives better in the process. Notice how Secretary of State Marco Rubio includes both of these elements in his words on Meet the Press.
Well, we don't need to. First of all, let me go back up. We don't need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States. You have to understand, why does China need their oil? Why does Russia need their oil? Why does Iran need their oil? They're not even in this continent. This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. And we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be a base of operation for adversaries, competitors, and rivals of the United States.
Have specific oil companies?
We also want to see that oil and the proceeds from it. Hold on. We want to see the oil proceeds of that country benefit the people of Venezuela.
When Christians interpret the Great Commission as enforcing submission to Christian hierarchies, conquest becomes a moral duty. Loving one's neighbor gets redefined as forcing their submission or removing them entirely. Or as Trump puts it, we're in charge, and if they don't behave, we'll attack them even harder. And if you think I'm just inserting the Christian side of this, then look back at what we've been seeing at the Pentagon for the last few months. We're having Secretary Hegseth running Pentagon worship services and talking about how the Pentagon bends its knee to Christ. Amidst all of these war crimes and kidnapping people and taking other countries to take their oil, we have the GOP posting on social media Revelation 21 verse 5, which says, "And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are faithful and true." They think they're carrying out the will of God in all of these attacks that they're doing and these conquests. So I've seen some liberals posting on social media that it would be nice if a foreign government flew into DC and kidnapped Trump. Of course, that would immediately lead to a World War III. And yes, if Trump had lost the election and was brought to trial for the legal issues he was facing, he could very well be in a prison cell right now. But there's one other problem with hoping another country would do such a thing. The problem is that any country who would fly in and kidnap our president would likely be a violent religious extremist nation of entitled supremacist colonizers. Ironic, isn't it? That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Thursday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.